Loathe is hands down one of the most exciting, mysterious, and let's be honest, confusing bands in the entire modern metal scene. A band that started out with a gimmick that everybody hated. A band that constantly gets compared to one of the biggest metal acts of all time. And a band that, after releasing their breakthrough heavy album, immediately released an ambient record. They are a total contradiction. They're metalcore, they're shoegaze, they're nu metal, they're ambient, they're impossible to pin down. And that's exactly why everyone is talking about them. They went from being dismissed as a cheap clone to being hailed as the future of heavy music. This is the story of Loathe and how they proved everyone wrong. Our story begins in Liverpool, UK, around 2014. Now, just to kick things off, this wasn't just some random garage band. The core of Loathe was already brewing in the local scene. Guitarist slash vocalist Eric and vocalist Kadeem had actually been playing together for years, cutting their teeth in a melodic metalcore band called Our Imbalance. And to be honest, they were sick of it. Kadeem later called it formulaic metalcore, stating that we didn't like the name, we didn't like the image, we wanted to do something completely different. And this wasn't just a fresh start, it was a deliberate reformation. They joined forces with guitarist Conal and they came together with a very specific, very deliberate vision. They didn't want to be just another metalcore band, they wanted to create an entity. And for those of you that have been around for a long time, this is where the masks came in. When Loathe first hit the scene, they were self-releasing, but their 2015 EP, Prepare, Consume, Proceed, and that whole anonymous vibe actually got them noticed. They signed to the brand new Sharptone Records in 2016, and that EP was actually the first ever release on this label. A year later, in 2017, they dropped their debut album, The Cold Sun. But going back to the masks, at the time, they were completely anonymous. Frontman Kadeem wore an almost Slipknot-esque mask, while the rest of the band went by stage names like DRK for Kadeem and DRT for Eric. Their whole vibe was dark, mysterious, and let's be real, at the time it was a huge turnoff for a lot of people. The Slipknot rip-off comments kind of wrote themselves. It felt like a gimmick and a desperate plea for attention in a scene that bands were already trying to stand out. People were, to put it bluntly, pretty critical. It almost overshadowed the music before it even had a chance. In interviews, the band said the whole point was to remove their human identities and let this hive mind entity deliver the music. It was an artistic concept, but in reality, it just kind of created a wall between them and their audience. And that's where they shot themselves in the foot, because their early music, like the 2017 debut album Cold Sun, was good. It was raw, chaotic, and aggressive. You could hear this weird, glitchy, nu metal meets metalcore thing bubbling under the surface. It was clear that these guys could play, but the whole masked gimmick was holding them back. So what did they do? Well, they had the balls big enough to just drop it completely and rebrand. They realized that the anonymity, which was supposed to help people connect with the music, was actually doing the exact opposite. They wanted to connect with people on a personal level, and in a total power move, they just stopped. They unmasked, and in doing so, they finally let the music become the entire focus. And then, that's when everything changed. With the masks gone, Loathe was reborn. They were still on Sharptone, and they started to refine that sound that they hinted on at The Cold Sun. And in 2018, they released a split EP with Holding Absence, which, looking back now, is an amazing snapshot of the two future UK titans, and ironically, both bands toured with another mass collective that you may have heard of that same year. Loathe's side was heavy, but it was also weird. It was atmospheric. You could hear the pieces starting to click into place. But the real turning point, the moment that made everyone's head snap around in the scene, came in early 2020. They released the album I Let It In, and it took everything. And to be honest with you, this album is a modern masterpiece. This wasn't just a step up. This was a band putting all that potential, all those weird influences together to create something beautiful. Gored and aggressive evolution with these feral, complex, absolutely filthy metalcore tracks. But then, just a few tracks later, you get hit with Is It Really You or Two-Way Mirror. Suddenly, it wasn't just a metalcore album anymore. It was hard to define. It was shoegaze, it was dream pop. Kadeem France, who we knew as this big terrifying screamer, was now part of a stunning dual vocal attack. The guitars were washed out in reverb, and they were sounding more like Bloody Valentine than Meshuggah. And then, just as you got comfortable, it would slam back into these bone-crunching nu metal grooves. This album was the contradiction, and it was a genre gatekeeper's nightmare. It was beautiful and brutal, often in the same song. This was finally the sound that they'd been chasing. This was the real Loathe, and the world finally got it. But with this new sound, I'd be stupid not to address the elephant in the room. You cannot have a conversation about Loathe, especially about I Let It In, without someone immediately screaming Deftones. And look, I get it. It's not a crazy comparison, I know. I mean, come on. A band that flawlessly blends heavy, chugging riffs with ethereal, shoegazy passages, and a vocalist who can switch from a whisper to a desperate scream. Let's be honest, that is the Deftones playbook through and through. Is It Really You could be a B-side from White Pony, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. And the band themselves have never shied away from this.
They download on our way to do some like interviews there. And I'm like, oh my god, there's Deftones. And they look at us and they're like, Loathe?
Oh, that
like,
must have been cool.
Yo.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep me cool. I'm like, yeah, Loathe, man. Do you know when people say don't meet your heroes? Like, I met him and he was such a like unique guy.
Better than you imagined.
Yeah, it was better than I imagined. Like,
they cite Deftones as a massive influence, but here's where I think that comparison just becomes lazy. To just call Loathe a Deftones ripoff is honestly just plain bullshit. Why? Because Deftones, even at the heaviest, have never been this heavy. Loathe pulls from a much more extreme place. The breakdowns in songs like Heavy as the Head are pure modern metalcore. The sheer aggression and technicality in their riffing is something that Deftones simply doesn't do. Loathe has a violence to their sound that is all their own. So yeah, the influence is obvious, but they're not copying the formula, they're evolving it. They're taking the blueprint and building something new. Something arguably even more extreme and dynamic for a newer generation. So how exactly do they get that sound? That massive, ground-shaking, is the building collapsing tone? Well, they have their own secret sauce and it's fucking genius. And this is where today's sponsor Gear for Music comes in, as they sent me one of their 638 baritones when they heard I was doing a video about Loathe. For all the guitar nerds watching, you'll know about baritone guitars. They have a longer neck, a longer scale length, and this lets you tune all the way down without the strings turning into wet noodles. This is the exact guitar that Loathe used to get that signature sound. And with this baritone guitar, Loathe takes it to an extreme. It's a custom hybrid tuning that Gear for Music set as standard for that baritone guitar. And it's tuned to E1, which is a full octave lower than a standard guitar. At that point is basically a bass. But all technicalities aside, the thing that I was shocked with the most was the price. This is priced as an entry-level guitar, but this feels and sounds like a premium baritone. So if you want to pick up your very own 638 baritone, Gear for Music is hooking you guys up. So simply head to the link in the description to pick up your very own baritone, the exact one that Loathe used. And using my dedicated link, you can get a badass baritone and directly support my channel. It is hands down one of the most innovative approaches to tone in modern metal, and credit to them for pulling it off. Thank you to Gear for Music for sponsoring the video. And with this signature sound, by 2021, Loathe was on top of the world. I Let It In was on every album of the year list. They played a legendary set at the Download Pilot Festival, which was basically the UK's big welcome back to live music after lockdown. They were becoming the band. So with all this hype and the modern metal world watching their every move, what did Loathe do next? Well, in February 2021, the 1-year anniversary of their metal masterpiece, they released The Things They Believe. And with this album, it had 0 guitars, 0 screams, and 0 breakdowns. A metalcore fan's worst nightmare. It was a 12-track, instrumental, ambient, synth-heavy album. This was, to me, one of the ballsiest moves I've ever seen a band make. They had just come off releasing one of the breakthrough metal albums of the decade, and Loathe just said fuck it. Instead, they released this dark, beautiful soundscape. It was a soundtrack for the lockdown, written and produced largely by guitarist Eric and bassist Faisal. It was a total power move. It was them planting a flag and declaring that they are artists, not just a metal band. They will do whatever they want, whenever they want, and to be honest, don't care about your expectations. And honestly, it only made them cooler. But as always seems to be the case, shit was hitting the fan behind the scenes. In September 2021, 7 months after the ambient album dropped, guitarist Connor Sweeney abruptly left the band. The band's official statement was, well, it was a standard corporate sounding, we wish him the best in his future endeavors. But Sweeney's statement, however, was not so typical. In a since deleted post, he made some very heavy sounding allegations about his treatment, citing a harrowing ordeal this past year, and he was leaving to preserve his own well-being and mental health. The band never publicly responded to these specifics, and it remains a pretty murky and dramatic chapter in their story. We'll probably never know the full truth, but losing the key member right at your peak is a massive blow. But this hasn't slowed Loathe down. If anything, it's made them stronger. I mean, all things considered, I think it's safe to say that Loathe has been through it all. They survived the early criticism, they shed their masks, they navigated internal drama, and they proved that heavy isn't just about breakdowns and blast beats. And coming into the end of 2025, they haven't lost a single step. And with a new album confirmed with the expected release date of February 2026, it's clear that they are ushering in a new era. They are without a doubt one of the most important working metal bands in recent history. They are the future, and they've proven that the only thing you can and should expect from Loathe is the unexpected. Loathe without a doubt is going to inspire the next generation of artists coming up in the scene. And speaking of inspiring artists, it's safe to say Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath did their fair share of that. And if you care about the history of heavy music, then you need to watch this video.